Good afternoon, it's 12:05 and I am recording myself answering some questions which I believe are for a project, although Cheslin hasn't clarified this for me, but anyway, here we go. So I have the questions printed and they're over there, so I'm looking at them when I'm looking across from the camera. What are some of the major barriers or constraints facing education in South Africa today? I believe there's only one major barrier in education in South Africa, and that is the inequality within the education system in this country. We still have too many schools that are treated as unequal or have facilities that are unequal to others in the same education system. So where you have schools that are trying to service the same children from a particular community or a particular group or a particular geographical location, you have all of those children accessing schools that are majorly different because of different resources, different facilities that are given to them by the education department, and that needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency by our department. What has the Department of Education done to address these barriers? I can only speak for the Western Cape. I need to at the outset say that the Western Cape is the only functional province in this country in terms of education. We are the education department that has done the most in terms of closing the barriers or the inequalities that exist. And the head of education in the Western Cape at the moment is a woman called Penny Wingerveld. And what Penny's done is she has started to identify functioning or good schools in this province. She has pumped money into those schools in order to expand them so that they can allow additional learners in. Now, Norman Henshelwood, the school that I teach at, is one of those schools. Over the last 5 years, under Penny's leadership as head of education, we have grown from 600 learners at our school to 1,150 learners. She gave us money 5 years ago to build additional classrooms, and we are now able to widen the net or broaden the base of learners from which we draw. So we are servicing learners that normally would not have been able to attend a school like Norman Henshelwood. The other thing that the education department in Western Cape has done to address the barriers or the limitations is that they have identified key projects, and Penny Wingerveld and her team are pumping money into that. One of her major projects has been one textbook per child per learning area or per subject, and she has made free textbooks available for all children in this province at all schools for all subjects. Now that kind of thing starts to address the inequalities that exist in our system. How is education funded in South Africa? We get a chunk of the national budget, the national government's budget. So much is allocated to education per year, and the education department then takes that and divides it amongst the 9 provinces, and that division is based on the number of learners registered in each province. Briefly describe some pedagogical practices in your school. Talk more about outcomes-based education. So outcomes-based education is not really what we're doing any longer. That's been replaced by a system called CAPS, which is the Curriculum and Assessment Policy Statement. And CAPS is a policy that says every school will teach the same curriculum, the same... Sorry about that little break. All right, so CAPS wants us to teach the same curriculum across all learning areas and across all grades. And the idea here is that schools are then expected to meet a minimum standard in terms of the pace of the work at which the learners are taught, and also in terms of the kind of assessments that learners are exposed to. And I think this is a fantastic idea. It's a world-class curriculum that schools are being asked to teach these days. I believe in CAPS. I believe that it's benefiting our learners. I know that schools have battled in the past with the pace of the work, etc., but it is benefiting our learners in that there is a minimum standard that all of them need to meet now. What are some of the differences between the US and the RSA education system? In the United States, it's very decentralized. South Africa, unfortunately, has not yet been able to decentralize education to provinces and to districts within provinces. We still have a one-size-fits-all from the top of the education department, from National and Pretoria, and they want to dictate and control every aspect of education, delivery of curriculum, assessments, etc. in this country. And while I can understand why they would want to do that in terms of addressing the disadvantages or the inequalities of the past, it does limit good functioning schools in terms of what they can do for the learners that they attract. And I think also what I like about the US education system is that there is an accountability built into that education system which we do not have in South Africa. Principals or administrators, as they are called in the US, are held accountable for the results that their schools produce, and they are asked to answer if those results are not up to scratch. And I think that's phenomenal, because again, the children benefit. The school principal, the school administrator over there needs to make sure that the teaching and the curriculum and the assessment is of a certain standard, and kids can win. Question number 6. Does the South African education system carry a legacy of ills or poor education since apartheid? Talk more about how apartheid has affected the education in the new South Africa. Do you know what? I think there are consequences of apartheid. There's a legacy of apartheid that this country is going to spend the next 100 years trying to overcome. But the inequalities are about facilities and resources. It isn't about the content or the curriculum that the inequality exists. It's about the kinds of schools that are available to learners. And Norman Henshelwood, the school that I teach at, which is on the border of Plumstead, Wynberg, Constantia, is what we call an ex-model C schools. And our learners are enjoying the benefits of the apartheid era. Apartheid funded the school, and the children that attend the school now are enjoying that legacy. However, 5 kilometers down the road, we've got Heathfield High School, or we've got Lotus River High or Crestway High School, where those learners don't have a quarter of the resources that our children have. And I think that is something that not the education department, the national government of this country needs to address. The education department needs to keep its focus on curriculum and assessment. The national government needs to address the inequalities in resources and facilities for the educators in this country. What has changed since our reintegration? As I say, there have been attempts made in certain provinces, Western Cape for instance, to address the inequalities of the apartheid era in terms of resources, but it is also very little, and a lot more needs to be done. How is the South African Department of Education addressing the issue of poverty and language so that every child can have an equal opportunity to participate in education? And so the idea here is that the National Department of Education has a policy around accepting learners at school. They also have a policy around what they call retention of learners in the system. Because part of the apartheid legacy has been, we for instance have 1 million kids who start grade 1 in a particular year. 12 years later, a quarter or 2/3 or half of those 1 million children make it out the other end and finish grade 12. So the question is, what is happening in between from grade 1 to grade 12, and how do we retain those learners in the system, hold on to them, motivate them, encourage them to finish, to stick it out to grade 12 and to finish their education in this country. And that has become quite a focus area for the National Department of Education, which I think is a good thing. Absolutely. What are the differences between learners produced by apartheid education and those produced today? I don't believe that the learners are different today. We teach a different generation. I am what they would have called a product of the apartheid education system. I'm a very different adult, a very different individual to the learners that I'm teaching today. It has nothing to do with apartheid or the education system. It just has to do with the fact that the generation that I'm teaching now is a different generation. They're called Generation Z. They're known as the technology generation. They're the ones born with mommy's wallet in the one hand and their cell phone in the other, and this is how they live their lives. This is what's normal to them. And so the education system has had to mold itself around the different child that we are busy working with, and that again has nothing to do with apartheid in this country. What are the threats and challenges to the present system of education in South Africa? Do educational opportunities differ among social classes? I think that's always a danger. But that, again, I don't believe has anything to do with apartheid. That has to do with the mindset of the parent of the child. How much do I value education for my child? What is my view of education for my child? How much am I willing to invest in my child's education? And that's going to determine how successful my child is in terms of his or her education. And so if as a parent I put no stock in a good educationist, I believe it's not going to achieve anything, it's not going to get you anywhere, I'm not going to encourage my child to continue to learn, to study, to pursue tertiary education after high school, etc., etc. And so I think the education department will do well in terms of starting to talk to parents of children and changing the mindset in terms of education is important. You must encourage your child to do this. And I think that will go a long way in terms of addressing inequalities of apartheid if they exist in terms of education system, and also in terms of making sure that the retention rate is increased, and also in terms of making sure that our country starts to produce graduates who can actually make a difference and impact the lives of our community, of our society, of our country, etc. Are there common learning standards across the entire country? Definitely not. Definitely not. As I said earlier, the Western Cape is the most functional province. There are absolute horror stories told by teachers and principals in other provinces about what the education department in those provinces are doing, how dysfunctional those education departments are, and how that filters down to dysfunctional schools, dysfunctional classes for children in all of those provinces. And so there needs to be perhaps a standardization in terms of the management of education institutions in our country, and they were talking about working with principals and working with deputies and HODs in schools to have a minimum standard enforced in all schools in this country, and that might assist in addressing the different standards amongst the different provinces. But I think also what is going to be key is the education department in a province needs to be staffed and manned by educated professionals. And that is then going to ensure that filtering down to districts and to schools, you have an educated professional approach, which is then going to benefit our learners. And so that's all of the answers that I have for you today. I have loved doing this recording for you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you well with whatever lies ahead in your own education in South Africa.